What you're about to hear doesn't really exist. Okay, well, it does kind of. So as some of you know, over the last year or so, I've been slowly working away at a book called, for now at least, Leading with Impact. And so I've been slowly collecting everything I've learned in my decades of working with product and technology executives and trying to distill all that into some kind of cohesive narrative, something that might be valuable to any leader who is taking on some kind of new challenge, whether that's a new team, a new role, maybe a whole new company. And my initial thought was, hey, there's a lot here. So a book is probably the right medium to convey all of this. And while I still believe that's true, and I will keep on releasing new chapters as they come available, some new tech has come out recently, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And this technology allows me to have everything I've written so far to be processed and magically turned into a podcast. Now, note that I said podcast and not audiobook. So what you're about to hear is not an audiobook. It's not some digital recording of a book. Instead, you are going to hear two people, quote unquote people, having a discussion about the book as if they've read it themselves. Now, unlike me, these people are not real. At least I'm pretty sure I'm real. I hope. Anyway, without further ado, here are two robots talking about my book. Hope you enjoy it.
Okay, so we've got this stack of information here, beta chapters for Matt's Leading with Impact, and I guess our mission is to pull out those golden nuggets, the stuff that makes you smarter but doesn't give you information overload.
Like a shortcut, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so you've shared the introduction and chapters 1-3 of Matt's guide for new tech and product leaders. It's still a work in progress, but I think it'll be really interesting to kind of dig into it with you and see what jumps out, right?
Well, chapter 1 really grabbed me because it's about that, I think it's a super common scenario. It's like you step into a new leadership role and things aren't exactly humming.
Yeah.
Maybe the team's not delivering or the work just feels completely disconnected from the bigger picture. And so whether it's a promotion or you're starting fresh somewhere new, the question becomes, how do I wrap my head around this team and start making things better?
For sure. And Matt frames this really well as a shift in focus, right? Like, you're no longer just responsible for your own output. You're looking at an entire system of people and how they connect to the business goals.
Yeah.
And he brings in this helpful distinction. It's actually from the Kanban guide, being efficient, which is all about using your resources well to deliver value, versus being effective, which is actually delivering what your customers want when they want it. It's that kind of intersection of doing things right and doing the right things.
And what's interesting is he really gets into those telltale signs that new leaders often walk into. Like, he talks about being swamped with work in progress. I've definitely seen that. More projects than people. And then there's the constant project delays, like, those nasty surprises.
Yeah.
And projects, maybe limping across the finish line late, underperforming. And then, of course, you've got team morale taking a nosedive with every priority shift.
Right.
Oh, and then you can't forget those cross-team dependencies that seem to materialize at the worst possible moment. Plus, there's this struggle to actually measure quality with, data, not just gut feeling. And what was it? Oh, yeah, the 52 flavors of Agile.
Yeah.
What does that one make you think of?
Oh, the 52 flavors of Agile. That's such a good one, right? Because, everyone says they're doing Agile, but each team has basically created their own version. It's like this Agile Frankenstein monster that's lost all the, the core benefits.
Agile in name only.
Exactly. And that often leads to, confusion and inconsistency across the organization. It's like, are we doing Agile? Are we not? What even is Agile?
Okay, so you've got all these visible symptoms, and Matt says the root cause often isn't a lack of skill or effort. There's something deeper going on.
Right.
He says it's a lack of dignity.
Oh, interesting.
And he defines dignity as the quality or state of being worthy, honored, or esteemed. So it's not just about being friendly, it's about whether your work environment respects people's capabilities and their inherent value.
Yeah. That makes sense. Especially in those kind of early high pressure days of a startup or, during rapid growth, this sense of operational dignity, it can really get eroded. It's like just constantly needing to get it done, often without, maybe a clear focus or sustainable processes. And yeah, that can really strip away a team's sense of agency and the respect they feel for their work. Like they're just cogs in a machine.
Right. And then as Matt lays it out, the consequences are pretty stark. You've got the obvious personal toll, burnout, huge. And then there's the impact on the business, like technical debt starts piling up from all those cut corners.
Yeah.
You end up with disengaged staff. They might be busy, but they're not productive. And eventually it trickles down to your customers, lower quality, missed expectations. But Matt has this core belief, and it really struck me. People do incredible things when they are empowered to apply their talents with dignity.
Ooh, I like that.
So if you flip that, take away the dignity, you're probably going to get mediocre results at best.
Totally. And he actually gives some concrete examples of what this absence of dignity looks like specifically for engineering teams.
Right.
Think about being forced to use tools that are just rigid and don't fit their workflow. Like those JIRA or GitHub setups that feel like they're working against you.
Right.
Or the constant pressure to deliver at an unsustainable pace, which of course leads to cutting corners on quality. And then there's the effect of constantly juggling multiple projects. Have you seen that?
Oh, constantly. I've seen teams spread so thin they can barely function.
Yeah. And it goes on. He talks about external people constantly dropping into internal team meetings, dependencies dumped on teams with no warning. It's like, hey, by the way, you're now responsible for this thing you've never even heard of. And then there's this real lack of clarity about, strategic decisions and how their work contributes. And then deadlines. They feel arbitrary, imposed, not based on the team's understanding of the work. And of course, you can't forget those dreaded public displays of velocity metrics. It's like a public shaming exercise instead of a genuine effort to improve.
Yeah, it's definitely not a pretty picture. But Matt actually, he gives some practical first steps to, start turning things around. Just shining a light on where that dignity might be lacking.
Okay, like what?
Well, first he suggests running a broad retrospective, but with a facilitator who is impartial, someone coming in without any baggage, ideally from outside the team or even outside the company. Yeah. And the key is asking really open-ended questions, like what are their goals, what are their biggest pain points, and what are their strengths? And Matt says you'll often hear about having too many projects in progress, or a lack of clarity on how their day-to-day work actually connects to the company objectives. Just giving people that space to give honest feedback can be really powerful.
Makes sense. What's his second suggestion?
His second tip is to start measuring employee engagement, but in a meaningful way. And he mentions that Chapter 5 is going to go into this in more detail, and he kind of warns against relying on those generic HR-built surveys.
Yeah.
Because they often feel a bit detached from the reality of the work. But the initial point is you need to understand how engaged your team actually is. It's a vital indicator of, is that sense of dignity present or not?
Makes sense. So then moving on to Chapter 2, the focus shifts to building this a solid operational framework to support, continuous improvement. And he makes a good point. It's like after those initial insights, it's tempting to just jump in and start fixing everything.
Right.
But without that clear and foundational operating model, it's hard to know if your changes are actually, making a lasting difference.
So how do you actually build that model?
Well, Matt says to build on empiricism. It's this idea that transparency, inspection, and adaptation, they need to be the cornerstones of how the team operates. And a key ingredient here is fostering and supporting team self-management, but, and this is important, within reasonable boundaries.
Okay, so why are those boundaries so important?
Well, it might seem counterintuitive, but true self-management, it's not a free-for-all. You actually need a minimal but sufficient set of clear boundaries, around company values, overall goals, expected behaviors to prevent teams from, drifting apart and undermining the collective objectives. It's like you're giving them a sandbox to play in, but you still have to define the edges of the sandbox.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
And he then brings in those core principles of Scrum, setting short-term sprint goals that clearly connect to longer-term product goals, and then holding regular sprint reviews with stakeholders to maintain transparency and gather that feedback. And maybe most importantly, implementing those sprint retrospectives where the team actually owns identifying and implementing their own improvement plans. And this creates that essential rhythm for regular inspection and adaptation.
Got it. So it sounds like you're not necessarily saying everyone needs to do Scrum, but those elements can be really valuable.
Exactly. He actually says Scrum is really just a framework for building a process. So regardless of what your teams are doing, you have to understand how work actually flows through the team. And he suggests two practical ways to visualize this.
Okay.
One is to, ask the team to collaboratively trace a recently shipped item backward, starting from the release and going all the way back to that initial idea.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And the other is to talk to your business stakeholders about a recent feature request and but follow that, journey all the way through development, deployment, maintenance. Have you ever done anything like that?
I haven't done the full traceback, but I can see how valuable that could be. And he also mentions you can visualize workflow at different levels, like from high-level strategic initiatives down to those, individual tasks.
Right.
And his recommendation to start simple is spot on, like using tools like Trello or Mural or even Post-it notes on a whiteboard. The key is that it's easy to change as you learn.
Totally.
He also stresses that you got to have easily visualized metrics. He even tells this story about a team that started putting a daily dot on a Post-it note for each item that's in progress. And that simple visual immediately highlighted how much work was just sitting idle.
Oh, wow.
He's right. Just visualizing the workflow almost always reveals some opportunities for improvement.
Totally. And then once you have that visual representation, the next crucial step is identifying those bottlenecks and inefficiencies.
Yeah, where things get stuck.
Exactly. So he says, look for areas where work is piling up. It's a clear indicator that the demand is exceeding the capacity at that stage. And this could be because of inefficient processes, a lack of clarity around roles, or, those poorly managed dependencies. And he gives this classic example of over-specialization. Let's say you have tons of developers, but not enough testers. Well, you're going to end up with a perpetually overflowing ready for QA column.
Yeah, makes sense.
And his advice on approaching these bottlenecks is to lead with curiosity. Ask the team why they think things are backing up before you jump in with your own solutions.
Yeah, get their perspective.
Exactly.
So I guess the next question is, how do you go about actually fixing those issues?
Well, instead of trying to implement some massive overhaul, he advocates for incremental improvements, small, manageable changes. And he suggests this powerful combination of lean change management, which focuses on insights, options, and experiments, and impact mapping. Have you heard of impact mapping?
I have, but I'd love to hear you kind of break down how that all fits together.
Sure. So he explains those initial retrospectives, the one-on-one conversations, even like well-designed surveys. They're all about gathering insights into what's working and what's not.
Right.
And then to generate options for improvement, he brings in impact mapping. It's actually a technique borrowed from product management. The process starts with defining a very clear improvement goal based on those insights you've gathered.
Okay.
And then you identify who are the key players, like the specific people, roles, or even stakeholders whose behavior needs to change to achieve that goal.
Got it.
Then you brainstorm, how can they help? What specific changes in their behavior would lead to that desired outcome? And finally, you determine what concrete actions as a leader can you take to encourage those changes? And those become your options, your experiments.
So it's kind of like a roadmap for change.
Exactly. And he gives this really tangible example around the goal of automating 80% of their manual test cases. And they look at who? The programmers, the quality engineers, the managers, the product managers. Then they say, how can each of those roles contribute? Programmers writing automated tests, managers setting that expectation, product managers prioritizing automation, and then the what becomes very specific actions, facilitating reviews of the definition of done, providing training, offering pairing opportunities, starting to track relevant metrics, and working with product owners to articulate that long-term value of automation.
Yeah, I think that visual, the impact map, that really helps connect all the elements.
Exactly. And then the crucial next step is you don't try to do everything at once. You pick one or a few of those what items as your initial experiments, and then you feed the results back into that lean change management cycle. You check if it's working, adjust your approach, and you keep iterating. And Matt also encourages, involving the team in this brainstorming process and even delegating impact mapping exercises to your direct reports as a way to build ownership and develop their problem-solving skills.
So you're giving them the tools to drive their own improvement, which is really powerful.
Exactly. And that nicely brings us to Chapter 3. Building a high-performing team. And he kicks us off by saying one of the very first things a new leader needs to do is evaluate team composition, like really understand the skills, experience levels, team dynamics, and figure out if there are any gaps or areas where you might need some structural changes down the line.
Insane.
And a critical part of that, he says, is understanding the dependencies, both within and around the team. He argues that high-performing teams should be able to discover, refine, and deliver value with as little reliance on external teams as possible. He even goes so far as to call dependencies true killers of productivity.
So true.
While the ideal might be zero dependencies, the focus should be on understanding the current situation.
Yeah. Know where you stand.
Exactly. And he offers this really simple but insightful exercise to map these dependencies. You gather representatives from each of the teams, and then you pick a high-level deliverable that was shipped recently, and then you collaboratively trace it back to the initial idea.
Oh, wow.
Then you create a grid with the different stages of your workflow as columns and the different teams as rows. And at each stage, if a team was involved, they raise their hand and you mark a 1 in their row.
Okay, so what does that 1 actually represent?
Well, it just indicates that the team was involved at that stage for that specific deliverable. And once you've mapped all the teams for a feature, you can calculate what Matt calls the dependency factor.
Dependency factor, got it.
And you calculate this by adding all the 1s in the rows of every other team, except the team that was primarily responsible for delivering that feature.
Okay, so a high dependency factor means?
A high dependency factor means that delivering that feature required a lot of coordination and handoffs across teams. And that, of course, introduces complexity and potential delays. He actually gives this example where Team A has a dependency factor of 7, which is pretty high.
Yeah, that sounds pretty messy.
It is. And he suggests running this for several features to see if any patterns emerge. And if you see consistently high dependency factors, then you might need to rethink your team structure. He gives a few potential approaches, like reorganizing teams to align their skill sets and their domain knowledge, considering dynamic reteaming, where you kind of temporarily pull together the necessary skills for those major features, or investing in upskilling your team members.
Right, make them more well-rounded.
Exactly. And he even mentions a marketplace of skills exercise as a simple way to get a baseline understanding of the skill distribution.
I like that.
Beyond the structure, he then moves to the idea of fostering a collaborative culture. And he says a high-performing team, it's not just about what they deliver, but how they deliver it. Effective collaboration, open communication, trust.
Yeah, it's about the process as much as the product.
Exactly. And he flags high WIP, work in progress, as a potential symptom of low collaboration. He even calls it a team in name only, a TINO situation.
The TINO, I like that.
And his recommendation is to reduce WIP by setting clear limits, maybe even hard limits. And then he suggests exploring things like pair and ensemble programming as ways to foster that natural collaboration within the team. And he makes this important point that it's okay if things slow down initially as they learn to collaborate, because the long-term benefits outweigh that temporary dip.
You got to slow down to speed up.
Exactly. And just like we talked about with Scrum, he says clear goals are essential, both those short-term sprint goals and the longer-term product goals. When teams are all working towards a shared objective that they understand, they're much more likely to collaborate and innovate than if they're just given individual tasks.
Right, they see the bigger picture.
Exactly. And finally, Chapter 3 tackles the topic of recognizing and rewarding success. And he stresses that regular recognition, formal and informal, is vital for maintaining motivation. But, and this is a big but, he also talks about the hidden perils of recognition, which he says he'll explore more in Chapter 5. The takeaway for now is that people experience and process recognition differently.
Right, so one size doesn't fit all.
Exactly. And he gives an example with Tim, who is an introverted team member, and public praise would probably make him really uncomfortable. So the advice is to tailor your recognition to the individual. And he even suggests just asking your team members about their positive and negative experiences with recognition in the past, what felt good, what felt cringy.
Yeah, just have that open conversation.
Exactly. And when it comes to rewards at the team level, he advocates for tying them to actually solving customer problems, not just hitting delivery targets. He says that just rewarding for delivery can lead to, a focus on getting things out the door, even if the quality isn't great. But by focusing on the customer outcome, you incentivize the team to really take ownership of the value they're creating.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I think we've covered a ton of ground here, and it's all about giving our listeners practical insights that they can use right away. We started by looking at that critical first step for any leader, which is truly understanding their team. and identifying those underlying issues, especially that often overlooked concept of dignity in the workplace.
Right.
We then talked about building a foundational operating model based on those principles of empiricism, transparency, inspection, adaptation. And of course, we emphasized visualizing workflow and taking an incremental approach to improvement using tools like lean change management and impact mapping.
Right. It's all about those small steps.
Exactly. And finally, we dug into the key aspects of building a high-performing team, from evaluating team composition and those dependencies to fostering a collaborative culture, and then recognizing and rewarding success in a way that motivates people and drives those positive customer outcomes.
Yeah, it's about focusing on the people as much as the product.
Absolutely. So for our listener, here's something to think about. Considering your current challenges, or even just your observations of teams you've been a part of, which of these steps resonates most with you? Is it the idea of looking for where that dignity might be absent? Or maybe mapping out your team's workflow? Or perhaps assessing your team's dependencies? What single small experiment could you initiate based on these ideas? Just to gain a clearer understanding or start driving a positive change in your team situation. We really encourage you to reflect on these concepts and those valuable insights that Matt has shared, because even a small step can have a huge impact down the road.
Couldn't agree more. It's all about starting somewhere and iterating from there.
Absolutely. All right, well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.
See you then.